starting with number 1 Ferry Battle. United Kingdom, 1937. The ferry battle entered Royal Air Force service as a light bomber built to carry a pilot, gunner, and bomb aimer on a single Rolls-Royce Merlin engine never meant to haul that much weight. Deployed to France in 1940, it relied on outdated doctrine that assumed unescorted daylight raids could still succeed. Its slow speed and weak defensive armament left it almost helpless against German fighters. During the attack on the Maastricht bridges, entire formations were torn apart in minutes, and crews who survived described the missions as near-suicidal. The battle's failure exposed how badly Allied bomber doctrine lagged behind reality. 2. Brewster F-2A Buffalo, United States, 1939. Built for the U.S. Navy and exported to Finland and Britain, the Buffalo was meant to be a nimble carrier fighter. Years of added armor, fuel tanks, and equipment piled weight onto an airframe whose engine never grew stronger to match. Over Malaya and Singapore, Commonwealth pilots found themselves outclassed by the lighter, far more agile Japanese Zero. Climb rates collapsed, turns became sluggish, and pilots regretted ever taking it into combat. Losses mounted so quickly that surviving squadrons were withdrawn within weeks, leaving the Buffalo remembered as one of the war's most lopsided mismatches. 3. Blackburn Bota, United Kingdom, 1939. Designed as a torpedo bomber and reconnaissance aircraft, the Bota was squeezed around engines too weak for its size after a planned engine swap shrank performance margins late in development. The cockpit layout left the pilot with dangerously poor visibility, especially during landing, leading to a string of accidents in training alone. Coastal Command crews found it underpowered and difficult to control on one engine, and combat losses combined with crashes during routine flights pushed it out of frontline service almost as soon as it arrived, relegated instead to towing targets and training navigators. 4. Messerschmitt Me 210 Germany, 1941. Intended as the successor to the successful Bf-110, the Me 210 was rushed into production lines before its flight characteristics were fully tested. Its short fuselage and automatic leading-edge slats made it dangerously unstable, prone to snapping into uncontrollable spins during ordinary maneuvers. German pilots dreaded the aircraft, and a wave of training accidents forced the Luftwaffe to halt production entirely while engineers redesigned the airframe. The delay crippled Germany's heavy fighter program at a critical moment, proving that skipping proper flight testing carried a cost measured in wrecked aircraft and lost lives. 5. Heinkel He-177 Greif, Germany, 1942. Germany's only operational long-range heavy bomber was crippled by a single requirement: the ability to dive bomb. To meet it, engineers coupled two engines together to drive one propeller per wing, cramming the power plants into tight, poorly ventilated nacelles. Overheating frequently caused engine fires mid-flight, earning the aircraft the grim nickname Flaming Coffin among aircrews. Missions over the Eastern Front and Atlantic convoys were repeatedly disrupted by aircraft burning before ever reaching the target. Pilots who survived engine fires considered themselves fortunate, and the program never delivered the strategic bomber force Germany desperately needed. 6. Bolton Paul Defiant, United Kingdom, 1937. The Defiant carried a 4-gun turret, but no forward-firing weapons, built around a doctrine that assumed enemy bombers would approach unescorted and undefended. Early in the Battle of Britain, German fighter pilots mistook it for a hurricane and approached from the front, suffering losses before realizing the trick. Once the tactic became known, Luftwaffe pilots simply attacked from below and behind, where the turret could not bear. Losses climbed sharply, and the Defiant was pulled from daylight fighter duty within months, surviving only as a night fighter where its turret found a more useful role. 7. Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver, United States, 1942. Rushed into production before the prototype's problems were resolved, the Helldiver suffered from a weak tail structure and unpredictable handling that triggered hundreds of design changes even after deliveries began. U.S. Navy dive bomber crews nicknamed it the Beast, and some pilots openly preferred the older aircraft it was meant to replace. Structural failures during dives and carrier landing accidents plagued early squadrons in the Pacific, undermining confidence at a time when precision strikes against Japanese shipping mattered most. Only years of continuous modification turned it into a reliable strike aircraft. 8. Messerschmitt Bf 110 Germany, 1937. Conceived as a heavy, long-range escort fighter capable of clearing the skies ahead of bomber formations, the Bf 110 instead proved too large and unwieldy to dogfight with nimble single-engine opponents. Over southern England during the Battle of Britain, it was thrown into a role it was never built for, and Spitfires and Hurricanes cut through its formations with ease. German commanders were eventually forced to assign single-engine fighters to protect the supposed escort fighter itself, an embarrassing reversal that exposed how badly pre-war assumptions about air combat had misjudged the realities of speed and maneuverability. 9. Armstrong Whitworth Albemarle, United Kingdom, 1940. Built largely from wood and steel because aluminum was scarce, the Albemarle was manufactured by a car company with no prior aircraft experience, and the compromises showed. Underpowered engines struggled to lift its heavy frame, while a troublesome, retractable tail wheel caused repeated landing accidents. By the time production ramped up, more capable bombers had already taken its intended role, leaving the Albemarle relegated to towing gliders and hauling paratroopers, a bomber that never dropped a bomb in the war it was designed for. Number 10. Heinkel He-162 Volksjäger, Germany, 1944. Ordered into existence in a matter of weeks during the war's final desperate months, the He-162 was built largely of wood by semi-skilled and forced labor, using adhesives that had not been properly tested under combat conditions. Structural failures plagued early flights, and during a public demonstration, a wing literally came apart in midair, killing the test pilot in front of witnesses. Inexperienced teenage pilots rushed through abbreviated training to fly it, faced an aircraft that demanded far more skill than the program ever allowed them to develop, turning a desperate solution into a fresh source of losses. 11. Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, Germany, 1944. The rocket-powered Comet could climb faster than any propeller fighter of its era, but its volatile fuel components were so unstable that a hard landing with residual fuel aboard could cause the aircraft to explode on the runway. Several pilots were killed not by enemy fire, but by their own fuel system, and ground crews handled the chemicals with deep unease. Powered flight lasted only minutes before the engine cut out, leaving pilots to glide home through hostile skies. The Comet's brief, blistering speed never offset the dread its own cockpit inspired in the men who flew it. 12. Bachem Ba 349 Natter, Germany, 1945. Designed as a nearly expendable vertically launched point defense interceptor, the Natter was meant to rocket upward, fire its weapons into a bomber formation, and have its pilot parachute to safety. On its first manned test flight, the canopy tore away during the violent launch, and the aircraft crashed, killing the pilot, Lothar Sieber, within seconds of leaving the ground. The program never recovered operational credibility, and the aircraft never saw real combat, remembered instead as a symbol of how far Germany's late-war engineering had drifted from anything resembling pilot survivability. 13. Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, Japan, 1945. Carried into range slung beneath a heavy bomber, the rocket-propelled Oka was a piloted flying bomb intended for one-way strikes against Allied ships. The slow, vulnerable mother aircraft had to fly perilously close to enemy fleets before release, and American fighters learned to target the bombers long before the Oka could ever launch. Many carrier aircraft and their crews were shot down with the weapons still attached, achieving nothing. The handful of successful strikes came at an enormous cost in aircrew, and the program ultimately drained resources without altering the course of the Pacific War. 14. Caproni CA-135, Italy, 1937. Plagued from its earliest trials, the CA-135 suffered chronic engine overheating and recurring in-flight fires that forced repeated redesigns of its power plants and cooling systems. Italian bomber crews found the aircraft underpowered for its size, with performance falling well short of original promises. Production stalled as engineers chased one fix after another, and by the time a workable version existed, more capable bombers had already taken priority. The CA-135 spent more of its service life grounded for modifications than it ever spent over a target. 15. KZ.1007 Alcyon, Italy, 1938. Built with a wooden fuselage to conserve scarce aluminum, the triple-engine Alcyon performed adequately in Italy's mild climate but began suffering structural weakening when deployed to the humid heat of North Africa. Glued joints absorbed moisture and slowly lost integrity, and crews reported airframes flexing and creaking under stress that earlier models never showed. Several aircraft suffered structural failures in flight, a slow, hidden danger that had nothing to do with enemy fire and everything to do with a construction choice never tested against the climates it would actually operate in. 16. Fiat CR-42 Falco, Italy, 1939. Even as monoplane fighters were redefining air combat across Europe, Italy continued mass-producing the CR-42, a biplane built around pre-war doctrine that prized tight turning over raw speed. Against Hurricanes and Spitfires during the Battle of Britain and the North African Campaign, its open cockpit and fixed landing gear were liabilities rather than charm. Pilots found themselves consistently outrun and outgunned, unable to translate maneuverability into survival against faster, better-armed opponents. The Falco's continued production reflected institutional reluctance to abandon a beloved design even as the air war moved decisively beyond it. 17. Region Re 2000, Italy, 1939. A capable airframe undone by an avoidable flaw, the Re 2000 carried its fuel directly within the wing structure without self-sealing protection, leaving it extraordinarily vulnerable to fire from a single well-placed hit. Italy's own Air Force largely rejected it for home defense once the risk became clear, choosing instead to export most production examples to Hungary and Sweden. Pilots who did fly it respected its handling, but treated every mission as a gamble, knowing that a stray tracer round near the wing route could turn the aircraft into a fireball within seconds. 18. Blackburn Rock, United Kingdom, 1938. A naval cousin to the Defiant, the Rock mounted the same turret fighter concept onto an already underpowered airframe, producing a fighter too slow to catch the bombers it was meant to intercept. Fleet Air Arm crews found it nearly obsolete the moment it entered service, unable to close on enemy aircraft before they completed their attack runs. Combat losses were limited mainly because the Rock saw little frontline use at all, quickly shifted to target towing duties where its turret and sluggish performance could do no further harm to anyone but morale. 19. Loire-Nieuport LN-401, France, 1938. Inspired by the German Stuka, France's dive bomber program produced an airframe paired with an engine too weak to give it the speed or climb to survive over a modern battlefield. During the Battle of France in 1940, the LN-401's slow approach speed made it an easy target for both fighters and ground fire, and many were lost attacking advancing German columns. With France's collapse imminent, several surviving aircraft were deliberately destroyed by their own crews rather than allowed to fall into enemy hands, a quiet end for a program that never had the power to fulfill its mission. 20. Brewster SB-2A Buccaneer, United States, 1941. Built by the same manufacturer responsible for the troubled Buffalo, the Buccaneer repeated many of its predecessors' mistakes, growing heavier with equipment than its engine could properly handle. Test pilots reported sluggish controls and poor stall behavior, and performance figures fell well short of what the Navy and Marine Corps required for frontline dive bombing. Rather than risk it in combat, the United States quietly confined the Buccaneer to training squadrons, where it taught new aviators to fly without ever proving it could survive a real engagement. 21. Curtiss-Wright CW-21 Demon, United States, 1940. Built almost obsessively light to maximize climb rate and speed, the CW-21 sacrificed armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and structural robustness to hit its performance targets. Flown in small numbers by Dutch and Chinese forces, it proved fast on paper but fragile in practice, often unable to absorb the damage that sturdier fighters could shrug off. During the defense of the Dutch East Indies, several Demons were destroyed in their first encounters with Japanese aircraft, their delicate construction offering speed but little chance of bringing a damaged pilot home. 22. Yokosuka D-4 Y Suisei, Japan 1942. An elegant, fast-dive bomber undermined by its imported inline engine, a license-built version of a German design that proved chronically unreliable in Japanese service conditions. Maintenance crews struggled to keep engines running, while the airframe's tail structure showed a troubling tendency to fail during high-speed dive recoveries, sometimes shedding pieces mid-maneuver. Crews lost aircraft not to enemy action, but to their own structural limits, and the type was eventually forced to switch to a more dependable radial engine, an admission that the original design had asked too much of an engine it could not trust. 23. Tupolev SB. Soviet Union 1936. Fast and modern when it first appeared, the SB bomber gave Soviet planners a false sense of security that lasted years past its relevance. By the time Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941, the aircraft's speed advantage had evaporated against newer fighters, and hundreds were destroyed on the ground in the opening days of the invasion before many ever took off. Those that did fly faced fighters they could no longer outrun, and the SB's catastrophic losses became one of the starkest symbols of how quickly battlefield superiority can be erased by standing still. 24. Westland Whirlwind. United Kingdom 1940. A genuinely advanced twin-engine fighter design was let down entirely by its engines. The Rolls-Royce Peregrine power plants chosen for the Whirlwind were never properly developed, as production priority shifted firmly toward the Merlin engine powering Spitfires and Hurricanes instead. Pilots who flew it praised its handling and firepower, but chronic engine unreliability grounded aircraft and curtailed missions throughout its short service life. With no improved engine ever delivered, a promising airframe was abandoned not because the design failed, but because the power plant it depended on was never allowed to succeed. 25. Vickers Warwick, United Kingdom, 1939. Conceived as a scaled-up heavy bomber alongside the Wellington, the Warwick was delayed for years by unreliable engines originally selected for the program, pushing its entry into service well behind schedule. By the time a workable version finally appeared, the Avro Lancaster had already taken over Britain's strategic bombing effort, leaving the Warwick with no remaining role as a bomber. It found a second life in transport and air-sea rescue duties, a capable airframe that arrived to a war that no longer needed what it had originally been built to do. 26. Fisher P-75 Eagle, United States, 1943. Assembled in haste from components borrowed off other existing aircraft to speed development, the P-75 Eagle promised quick production, but delivered an airframe with mismatched aerodynamics and disappointing performance in every category that mattered. Test pilots found it underpowered for its weight and unimpressive in maneuvers against fighters already in frontline service. The program was canceled before a single Eagle saw combat, the clearest possible verdict on an aircraft built more from spare parts and urgency than from a coherent design philosophy, ending its story before pilots ever had the chance to regret flying it. If you enjoyed uncovering these bizarre aviation failures, there are plenty more strange stories still waiting to be told. Subscribe for more forgotten aircraft, engineering disasters, and the unexpected moments that shaped aviation history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.